Cell size. So cells are really, really small. So here's a blue whale, and if you look at this, it's an order of magnitude each time. So we're going from 10 meters down to 1 meter, which is roughly 3 feet. And so people are somewhere between 1 meter and 10 meters on the closer side to 1 meter, right? So not quite 2 meters. And then here's 0.1 meters. So we're going down an order of magnitude with each leap. So here's the size of a little mouse, and here's an ant. Here's a frog egg. Here's a human egg. This is about as little as we can see. And then here are the size of eukaryotic cells from 10 micrometers to 100 micrometers. Whoops. I think I didn't have my pen up. There we go. And so these cells, you can see they're complicated. These are eukaryotic cells. And then bacteria, those are prokaryotic cells. And so you can see the size of a chloroplast is on the lower end of the size of bacteria. But some bacteria a little bit, some bacteria even smaller. And then chloroplasts fit inside of certain eukaryotic cells, plant cells. If you go smaller, another order of magnitude down, you're going to see the size of viruses. And it makes sense that viruses are small. They're made out of just proteins and either DNA or RNA, and they infect cells. So they're going to be very, very small. There are viruses that will infect eukaryotic cells, and there are viruses, different viruses that will infect bacteria, actually. There are, well, let's look at amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks, or the monomers of proteins. So you put amino acids together to make proteins. You put proteins and DNA or RNA together to make viruses. And then here's the size of atoms. So what you need to know is that eukaryotic cells and prokaryotic cells are all very small, with prokaryotic cells being smaller than eukaryotic cells. And this is a really cool website that I'm going to bring you to in class, and it's going to be on It's Learning so you can see the size of things in general. Question, are the cells in an elephant bigger, smaller, or about the same size as the cells in a mouse? And to look at that, first I want to look at surface area and volume a little bit. So the volume of this block is the same as the volume of all these blocks. All you did, this is 2 millimeters, and this is 2 millimeters, and so is this. So if you take this and cut it along here, you're going to get this cut, and then cut it this way, and then cut it along here. So what I want you to think about is, let's say a mitochondrion that's in here, if this were a cell. How long would it take for oxygen to diffuse from the outside into here? Compared to, let's look at the inside of this one. How long would it take for oxygen to diffuse to the center of that cell? So it would take a lot longer. So the reason really that you need small cells is that so oxygen can diffuse in and nutrients can diffuse in fast enough so that your cells get it in time so they don't die. And you need your waste to diffuse out. And this would be just too big for waste to diffuse out. So there's a point at which you have the right size of a cell. So if a cell's too big, nutrients and oxygen won't be able to diffuse inside fast enough, and waste won't be able to diffuse out fast enough. They can't be really, really, really tiny, though, because you still have to fit a nucleus in there, and DNA is a certain size. They're all made out of these real things, these atoms that have a certain size. And you put the atoms together to make the molecules. The molecules are a certain size. You can't fit Golgi bodies and ribosomes and centrioles and all that stuff into a cell if it's too small. So there's a certain size where it works, where it's small enough that it can get the nutrients diffused into it, and big enough where it can fit everything inside of it, and that would be the size of a cell. So to answer the question was, are the cells in an elephant bigger, smaller, or about the same size as the cells in a mouse? The answer is they're about the same size, but the elephant has many more cells than a mouse. So your cells are the same size as this big elephant and the same size as this little mouse, but you have more cells than a mouse and fewer cells than an elephant. Differentiation. This means the process of making cells different. And so here's maybe one of your nerve cells in your brain, and here's a white blood cell that fights infection, and here's a muscle cell. These cells all have exactly the same DNA. And they came from one original type of cell called a stem cell. A stem cell is like a baby cell. It's the cells that, you figure if you have an egg cell and a sperm cell fertilizes it, and you start like that, you're a zygote, that's a single cell. And all of the many, many, many different types of cells in you came from that one zygote. So at some point, they had to differentiate. The crazy, the interesting, the wonderful thing is that every one of your cells, with the exception of some cells that have lost their DNA, like your red blood cells, every one of your cells has the same DNA. So I want you to think of your DNA as a bunch of books, instruction manuals. And so you actually have 23 sets of these books. Now I'm making them look kind of funny because they're see-through. That's not good. Anyway, so you have, I'm not going to draw all 46 books, but here are all your books. Pretend I didn't make that. Anyway, if you want to make a neuron, there are instructions toward the back of this book and in the beginning of this book, and there are instructions here in the beginning of that book, and a couple of pages in this book. You would read just the parts of the book that tell you how to make a nerve cell. And it's like that with your DNA. You have a ton of DNA. You have 46 chromosomes in this cell, but you only read the parts important to make nerve cells. You don't read the parts for making white blood cells because you don't need to become a white blood cell. If you're a white blood cell, though, you would, let's change color here. Here, let's change to this one. If you're a white blood cell, you would read this part and that part and that part. And if you're a muscle cell, you would, let's see, make something bright. Um, if you're a muscle cell, you might read this page and these pages in here and the pages in here. And so you have the same DNA in each one of these, but you read different parts of the DNA. And all of these cells came originally from this stem cell. Cool, huh? So cells in a multicellular organism become specialized by turning different genes on and off. Remember, a gene is, maybe I haven't defined this yet, a gene is a piece of DNA. So a section of DNA, and it's a section of DNA that codes for a protein. So there are proteins in each of these cells that are the same, and that means the DNA, that same DNA would be read in all of them. But there are proteins in here that you do not find in here. And so that DNA is turned on and read, and you make a protein from it in this one, but you don't do it in this one. This one has some different genes that are turned on, and you make some different proteins in here than you would here. So you're turning on different parts of your DNA. You're reading different parts of your instruction manual. So this whole process is known as differentiation, the process of making your cells different. Specialized animal cells, here are some examples. That's a muscle, or these are a few different muscle cells. They're long, they're thin, they have these stripes, and their whole point is to contract. That's their whole function. And so the DNA that's used here, the proteins that are made here, are going to be different than the DNA that's made here and the proteins that are made here. The whole function here is to carry oxygen around. And so you read DNA to make a lot of hemoglobin. And in fact, these things don't even have a nucleus in them anymore because you make all your hemoglobin, then the DNA, the nucleus actually goes away. It actually disintegrates in these because they don't live forever. They don't reproduce. They only live for 120 days. So the protein that's made here, hemoglobin, totally different than the proteins that are made here. The proteins that are made here are mainly actin and myosin. And myosin, something called myoglobin. And there are some other proteins made. The big protein made here is hemoglobin. So the hemoglobin gene was turned on in this cell. The hemoglobin gene was not turned on in this cell. The actin gene was, the gene for making actin, the DNA or gene for making myosin, the DNA for making myoglobin, those were all turned on, but not the hemoglobin one. And here's another cell type, cheek cells. These were scraped off of the inside of somebody's cheek, and they're not really purple, they were stained that way. When they're intact, when they're connected, they actually look like that. And their whole point is protection. So they have different DNA that's turned on. They do not have actin or myosin or hemoglobin or any of that stuff. They have different proteins that are turned on to make them just the right size and shape to do the function that they do to protect your cheeks. Here are some specialized plant cells. So these are some cells that do photosynthesis, although it doesn't really show in here very well, the chloroplast. But look at this. These are guard cells, and I think it even says that. Yep. So these two are guard cells. They can control the trigger pressure. They can get bigger and smaller and have this opening either open or they can close it up. That allows oxygen to go in or out, or carbon dioxide to go in or out, or water. And so your cells, sorry, not you, a plant can actually control this thing, opening this hole, this stomata. Here is a totally different set of cells. These are xylem, and so they are going to transport stuff. This one doesn't transport, it just opens and closes, whereas this one's going to transport stuff through the cell, through the plant. And then this last one is pollen. Its function is reproduction. Looks totally different, has a different function than these cells. So you have specialized plant cells and specialized animal cells. Every truly multicellular organism will have specialized cells. And I think that's where I'm going to stop.